The cold March morning of 2013 began with a quiet but unusual disturbance on Willow Bend Road in Antioch, Nashville. 3 unmarked police cars slowly pulled up in front of a modest single-story house that had never drawn attention for many years. Neighbors subtly parted their curtains, watching as officers from the cold case unit, wearing light tactical jackets, deployed around the area. Inside, Raymond Holt, 62 years old, was preparing his first cup of coffee of the day, a habit he had maintained for nearly 3 decades as a taciturn garage mechanic, known to the neighborhood only for his quiet gait and polite nods. A rapid knock came at the door at 7:06 a.m. Raymond Holt, Nashville Police. We have a warrant to question you regarding the disappearance of Michael Radcliffe in 1984. The officers later recounted that Holt's hand trembled slightly as he set the coffee cup down, but his face remained strangely calm, as if he had been waiting for this moment for nearly 30 years. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. Nashville in 1984 operated in an expanding urban structure, but one still significantly limited in surveillance technology. No widespread traffic cameras, fragmented data reporting systems, and tracking individual movements relied almost entirely on direct eyewitness accounts. In that context, Michael Radcliffe, a jewelry store owner with a stable schedule and consistent daily habits, was considered highly unlikely to leave his familiar environment voluntarily without notification. He left work at 8 p.m., recorded by the closing register timestamp and end-of-day report. Around 8:10 p.m., he returned to the East Nashville residential area. A neighbor in the same row of houses saw him drive into the internal road and turn on the front porch light. After that point, no further social interactions were recorded. By 10:30 p.m., the house lights went out one by one in his usual routine pattern, indicating the home had shifted to normal nighttime rest. Between approximately 3:55 to 4:05 a.m., a neighbor in the adjacent house heard a brief mechanical sound described as similar to a garage door opening, but no one checked at the time because it was an hour when activity was rare in the neighborhood. By 6:45 a.m., when the household woke up, Michael was not present. The bed showed no signs of recent use, and the car was gone from the garage. A quick check of all rooms found no physical irregularities, no items disturbed, no signs of forced entry, no scattered belongings. Family members confirmed receiving no notice of departure, no sudden appointments, and no knowledge of any possible destination. The absence of the vehicle, combined with no left contact information, quickly led to the situation being assessed as unusual. At 7:14 a.m., the household contacted Nashville Police to report a missing person, closing the chain of events from the previous night and initiating the first step of the legal process. Immediately after receiving the report, Nashville PD dispatched an initial response team to the scene according to 1984 protocols, beginning an assessment of risk level. In cases of an adult missing under 24 hours, it typically did not yet meet emergency criteria unless clear signs of danger or obvious criminal indicators were present. Nevertheless, the absence of the subject's means of transportation and the undetermined time frame were noted as elements requiring attention. Investigators gathered basic identifying information including age, height, physical description, last seen clothing, travel habits, health status, and job-related details for use in cross-referencing if the search expanded. The personal vehicle description, including color, license plate number, and any distinctive body features, was also recorded in the file. Police opened a missing person case under the standard code and began establishing minimum data points to form an initial assessment. The investigation team interviewed primary witnesses, including family members living in the home and the closest neighbors, focusing on timelines prior to the discovery of the disappearance to determine the last point the subject was seen directly or indirectly. This process established the last known point at the residence itself, around the time the house lights went out at approximately 10:30 p.m., further reinforced by information about the garage door sound in the middle of the night. From the collected data, police built an initial timeline covering the period from the subject's return home to the point he was discovered missing, while identifying a multi-hour information gap during the night. With no signs of forced entry, no evidence of struggle, and no witnesses reporting other unusual activity, the case was placed under monitoring per the protocol for adult missing persons, MATED meeting criteria to activate major investigation or deploy special units. The on-scene team completed basic documentation, handed the data to the duty desk, and maintained the file as open with low priority, awaiting new information or unusual developments to decide on further expansion. After completing the initial intake process, police began verifying the timeline by collecting and cross-checking all verifiable data related to time points before the disappearance was discovered. This started with checking workplace records to confirm the time the subject left the jewelry store on his last day. Time logs, register closeout receipts, and statements from the evening shift employees all indicated he finished work around 8 p.m. and left the store shortly afterward. This data was treated as the first verifiable time marker, supported by physical evidence. The investigation team next checked landline phone usage at the home to assess whether the subject had contacted anyone after returning. Call records showed the last call early in the evening but no activity afterward, reinforcing the assessment that no notable communication occurred in the period after he returned home. Field investigators canvassed the surrounding area for additional passive data, streetlight status, light from neighboring homes, possible audible cues, and the presence or absence of unfamiliar vehicles during the overnight to early morning window. The next-door neighbor confirmed the subject's porch light was on when he returned around 8:10 p.m. and off around 10:30 p.m., consistent with the family's usual routine. This information helped confirm the subject did not leave immediately after arriving. The team also re-evaluated the statement about the garage door sound around 3:55 a.m. The witness described the sound as relatively short and distinct, consistent with the mechanism of an older garage door that produced a loud noise when opening. Mechanical verification was conducted by operating the garage door under similar conditions to compare volume and sound characteristics, confirming the statement aligned with reality. Based on the established markers, the team reviewed the subject's routine behavior over the preceding weeks to detect any potential deviations. He was described as having a stable schedule, typically returning home between 8:15 p.m. and staying within family routines until the next morning. No reports from family or neighbors indicated any habit of leaving at night or midnight, nor any unusual activity in the days leading up to the disappearance. These factors reinforced the assessment that movement in the pre-dawn hours was abnormal and outside normal behavior patterns. After compiling all obtained data, police constructed a specific timeline. The subject was confirmed to have left work at 8 p.m., arrived in the residential area around 8:10 p.m. House lights went out at 10:30 p.m., indicating evening rest, and the garage door opening sound around 3:55 a.m. was the final signal suggesting the subject may have left, or that some external intervention occurred. The discovery of the absence took place at 6:45 a.m. when the family woke up. Thus, analysis narrowed the disappearance window to over 4 hours, from after the house entered lights-out status to the garage activity. This was a gap with no direct witnesses, no device records, and no physical evidence reflecting what happened during this period, although long enough for multiple scenarios to be possible. The investigation team found no indicators suggesting criminal activity had occurred, no signs of struggle, no forced entry, no missing property beyond the vehicle, no sounds of argument or destruction, and no witnesses seeing anyone else approach the house that night. The police's preliminary conclusion after completing timeline verification was that the case featured a notable time gap requiring continued monitoring, but based on all available data, there were insufficient elements to classify it as a criminal event or voluntary departure. The timeline showed the disappearance occurred under conditions lacking surveillance data and without clear unusual factors, so the event continued to be classified for monitoring rather than upgraded to major investigation. After finalizing timeline verification and establishing a last known point at the subject's residence, police launched the first search phase focused within a 5-kilometer radius of the disappearance point. This was the standard radius for missing persons cases without clear criminal indicators, based on the assumption the subject may have left on foot or encountered an incident in the nearby area. The search team was divided into small groups to cover residential streets, internal roads, and areas without cameras or lighting, common in Nashville in 1984. The first group handled trails leading into vacant land behind the row of houses, where steep terrain and dense trees easily obscured visibility. Due to the length and number of trails, the group searched segment by segment, noting any potentially relevant traces, such as skid marks, footprints, or dropped objects, but found no leads. The second group was deployed to nearby parks, especially Two Rivers Park, which had large acreage and high tree density. The team swept lakeside areas, grassy fields, public seating zones, and walking paths, but detected no signs the subject had been there during the disappearance window. The third group checked high-risk accident locations such as steep road sections, areas near retaining walls, and common slip or fall spots, but found no matching traces. Next, a special detail searched the Cumberland riverbank, where deep water and strong currents made an accident possible but not excludable. However, during manual checks by small boat and shoreline observation, no floating objects, slide marks on the bank, or vehicle tracks near the water's edge were found. Areas under bridges, boat ramps, and docking points were also checked, but yielded no useful data. In parallel with ground searches, a K-9 unit was deployed for basic scent tracking. The dog was taken to the likely last standing point around the house and garage area, but after several hundred meters of looping in the neighborhood, the scent did not extend in any specific direction and dispersed, indicating no clear pedestrian departure from the residence. This was a key indicator, as in missing persons cases where the subject left on foot voluntarily. K-9 units often track the scent for a certain distance before it dilutes. The search team's report also noted no signs of struggle, no dropped evidence along routes, and no unfamiliar footprints near the garage or backyard. The complete absence of physical evidence in the immediate vicinity suggested a low likelihood that the subject had fallen, been injured, or encountered an incident nearby. At the same time, the vehicle's absence from the garage further supported the conclusion that departure did not occur on foot. After completing the full 5-kilometer sweep and compiling data, the Phase 1 search team concluded the subject was not present in the near-home area and left no traces sufficient to determine direction of travel. The lack of evidence, no struggle indicators, no accident signs, and no clear pedestrian path rendered direct search ineffective in the immediate area, while positioning the disappearance as likely involving vehicle movement or intervention beyond the initial radius. When the 5-kilometer search phase yielded no useful data, authorities shifted to an expanded search phase under the hypothesis that the subject left the residence by vehicle or was taken beyond the initial radius. The focus of this phase was peripheral Nashville roads capable of quickly exiting the residential area and leading to broader zones where a vehicle could move without drawing attention. Ground search teams were directed to major corridors such as Brealey Parkway, a loop road, allowing quick departure from the inner city, followed by I-40, the interstate serving as a cross-state artery, and the area around Old Hickory, with its network of small intersecting roads, high tree density, and many unlit turns. The goal of the sweep was not only to locate the vehicle, but also to identify risk points such as sharp curves, areas prone to single-vehicle accidents, or locations easily concealed if a vehicle left the roadway. The second group reviewed accident reports provided by traffic police within 48 hours of the disappearance, including burned vehicles, abandoned roadside vehicles, off-road crashes, or minor collisions with no injuries. All reports were manually cross-checked against the subject's vehicle description, including color, year, and license plate structure. However, no matches or close similarities were found, and most abandoned vehicles were claimed by owners the same day. Checks of impound lots and independent repair shops also recorded no vehicle matching the description. Additionally, search teams examined vacant lots near Old Hickory, as these were places vehicles could be abandoned with little notice. Nevertheless, dirt roads and tree-covered areas showed no fresh tire tracks or signs of vehicle movement during the suspected time frame. After ruling out an accident in the expanded area, police evaluated the possibility the vehicle was moved by a third party. This hypothesis was considered based on the lack of any traces in search zones 1 and 2, along with no evidence or remains at the scene or along major routes, suggesting the vehicle may have been removed during the pre-dawn hours to avoid leaving traces in the neighborhood. The absence of skid marks, tire tracks on dirt roads, or drag marks further supported the likelihood the vehicle left under normal control rather than in a sudden accident. Police also reviewed vehicle theft frequency in the area, but internal data showed no thefts matching the time frame and no signs of garage lock tampering at the subject's home, undermining a car theft scenario. After compiling all data from the two search phases, the operational conclusion was that the vehicle was the central variable in the disappearance. Apart from the recorded garage opening in the early morning, all other elements provided no additional clues about the subject's direction of travel. Since the vehicle disappeared at the same time the subject was no longer in the house, the subject leaving by car was considered far more plausible than leaving on foot. Therefore, analysis shifted focus to the vehicle as a key lead in determining the nature of the event, as up to this point no evidence showed the car remained in the vicinity or was stopped at any official storage facility. The vehicle became the sole element capable of connecting the subject, the time of disappearance, and the direction of movement out of Nashville from night into early morning, marking it as the top priority target for subsequent investigative steps. After completing the two search phases without obtaining any trace of the vehicle or the missing subject, The focus of the analysis shifted entirely to evaluating the vehicle's movement possibilities based on behavioral patterns and traffic conditions in Nashville in 1984. The fact that the vehicle disappeared around the same time the subject was no longer in the house made the car the central element of the entire operational assessment, and the investigative team began constructing three main scenarios to determine the nature of the event. The first scenario considered the possibility that the subject left voluntarily using their personal vehicle during the night. However, when cross-referenced with prior lifestyle habits, no data supported the likelihood of voluntary departure. The subject did not take essential items, did not prepare luggage, had no sudden appointments, and there was no record of any communication indicating an intent to leave the house. Additionally, the subject's stable routine and lack of any clear motivation to leave the residence at night further undermined the basis for this scenario. The second scenario assessed the possibility that the vehicle was stolen while the subject was inside the house. However, the scene examination showed no signs of forced entry into the garage. The door was not broken or picked. The mechanical locking system was not tampered with, and there were no traces indicating that an outsider had entered the house or garage area. The surrounding residential area also recorded no vehicle thefts in the proximate time frame, and if the vehicle had been stolen, typical signs such as forced door entry or disabled locks would usually appear, none of which were present in this case. Therefore, the vehicle theft hypothesis was deemed inconsistent with the actual scene. The third scenario became the focus of the investigation. The vehicle was driven by a third party to conceal the subject's disappearance or in connection with an unrecorded event within the search radius. With no traces appearing in the two previous search zones, combined with the scent tracking dogs failing to establish a direction of travel on foot, the possibility that the subject drove away from the house was gradually ruled out, giving way to the conclusion that another person had taken control of the vehicle during the period when the garage was opened, between 3,055–4,005 a.m., a time frame consistent with the absence of direct witnesses and lack of supporting surveillance data. To strengthen the analysis, the investigative team reviewed data from gas stations operating at night within a 15-kilometer radius of the residence. Gas stations in 1984 almost never used cameras, so the only exploitable information was payment receipts, shift logs, and manual descriptions from workers if they recalled any noteworthy vehicle. After checking reports from all relevant stations, no records matched the vehicle's description. Some employees reported seeing a vehicle of similar color, but could not confirm details due to poor lighting and lack of license plate recollection. The collected data was insufficient to establish any link to the vehicle. The investigative team continued checking public parking lots, overnight parking areas, and temporary unregistered parking spots. However, as these locations had no license plate logging or camera systems at the time, verification was limited and relied solely on manual comparison of descriptions. No vehicle in the checked list matched the subject's vehicle's characteristics. The Traffic Investigation Unit reviewed toll booth data to determine if the vehicle left Nashville via major routes. Although toll recording systems at the time were still manual, some booths log vehicle types and passage times. When comparing data from 3:30 to 6 a.m., no vehicle matching the description appeared. This largely ruled out major public routes, as passage through main highways would have had a high likelihood of being noticed by toll booths or on-duty staff. After all obvious public travel routes were excluded, police shifted to evaluating less apparent possibilities, including the vehicle being taken to secluded areas such as private warehouses, vacant lots, or private garages not subject to city monitoring. In 1984 Nashville, private warehouses operated independently without vehicle entry-exit registration requirements, so a vehicle could be concealed there without generating any official record. This made the hypothesis of the vehicle being moved to a hidden location plausible, especially given the absence of traces around the residential area and no accident reports. The overall conclusion from the analysis phase indicated that the vehicle remained the single most important variable in the entire disappearance case. It was not found in the nearby area, was not recorded in public traffic networks, did not appear in lists of abandoned or destroyed vehicles, and there is no evidence supporting voluntary departure or conventional theft. These factors collectively led to the assessment that the vehicle had been driven in a manner designed to avoid the extremely limited surveillance systems of 1984, making it the only remaining lead capable of expanding the investigation in the absence of direct data on the missing subject. After analyzing the vehicle-related investigative direction without obtaining specific indicators to determine the route of travel, the investigative force launched an outer ring analysis branch to determine whether the disappearance was related to occupational factors, work relationships, or social interactions within the subject's contact sphere prior to the disappearance. This was deemed necessary because in many missing persons cases without signs of violence at the scene, work relationships or financial transactions often serve as hidden sources of potential conflict that could lead to third-party intervention. Initially, the investigative team collected statements from all employees at the jewelry store, including those on shift in the 2 days prior to the event, bookkeeping managers, and those whose work hours overlapped with the subject's. The statements indicated that the subject was present at the store in a normal state, showed no signs of stress, had no arguments with customers, and did not mention any incidents related to security or merchandise. End-of-day transactions were also verified, revealing no unusual transactions or notable disputes. The investigative force continued examining the subject's appointments in the 48 hours before the disappearance to identify any meetings, business exchanges, or activities that could have created risk. The appointments included 3 customer meetings for jewelry repairs, a brief exchange with a supplier about shipment status, and 1 recorded appointment that had been canceled the previous afternoon. When cross-referencing employee statements and transaction receipts, no abnormal signs or sudden schedule changes suggested preparation to leave Nashville or risk from a partner. The investigative team expanded the review to relationships that could lead to professional disputes, including individuals who had previously had disagreements during transactions or dissatisfied customers. Checking old store reports revealed no cases involving threats to personal safety, and the store had no prior record of serious customer conflicts. Suppliers and business partners confirmed no ongoing financial issues or disputes at the time leading up to the disappearance. To rule out the possibility that the subject left due to financial difficulties or abruptly disappeared to evade debt-related responsibilities, the investigative team cross-checked personal and store financial records. Business records showed stable revenue with no signs of sudden losses or abnormal cash flow fluctuations. Personal account checks also detected no large withdrawals, suspicious transfers, or transactions indicative of preparation to leave. Police simultaneously verified that no new debts had arisen, no creditors had approached the store or family, and no legal actions targeted the subject. This ruled out departure due to financial pressure. To ensure no occupational factor that could lead to harm from customers or related parties was overlooked, police reviewed customer feedback records from the 6 months prior to the event. The data showed that disputes were minor, mainly involving delivery times or slight technical errors, and were fully resolved. No case rose to the level of serious conflict or exhibited threats, indicating no latent dangerous element arising from business operations. The investigative force also examined internal employee relationships to identify possible in-store disagreements, but interviews indicated a stable work environment with no internal conflicts or personal grievances that could motivate harm to the subject. Synthesizing all statements and collected data, police identified no occupational conflicts, financial disputes, or threat indicators that could explain the subject's sudden disappearance. There was no evidence that the subject was followed, pressured, or connected to individuals with criminal records. The entire work-related relationship system was assessed as stable and unrelated to risks of violence or coercion. This led to the conclusion that the occupational and work relationship investigative direction yielded no suspicious indicators and could be eliminated as a motive related to the disappearance. This kept the vehicle as the only remaining unexplained variable while narrowing the range of potential causes as factors related to occupation, finance, and customers were fully ruled out within the scope of verified data, while the investigative direction related to work and professional relationships produced no clear signs of conflict or risk. The investigative force shifted to evaluating statements from family members to identify potential discrepancies, information gaps, or internal inconsistencies that could support the formation of new hypotheses. The focus in this phase was the statement of Evan Radcliffe, who was present in the house on the night of the event and was also the first to discover the subject missing from the residence in the morning. Police cross-referenced Evan's statement according to each provided timeline point: the time he claimed to have gone to bed, the time he woke up, and the only sound he reported hearing during the night. Evan stated that he went to bed around 10:30 p.m., coinciding with the house lights being turned off, and did not wake up until 6:30 a.m. when preparing to leave the room. When asked about any unusual sounds during the night, Evan vaguely mentioned that he might have heard light movement, but was not certain what it was, and could not specify the time. When compared with the neighbor witness statement of hearing the garage door open between 3:55 to 4:05 a.m., the investigative team noted a discrepancy in Evan's description of not hearing any clear sounds as garage operation under quiet conditions typically produces enough noise to be noticeable from the bedroom, especially in a townhouse structure without complete soundproofing. Additionally, when asked to describe his state during the night again, Evan could not provide basic details such as times of waking up, outside noises, or his own activities in the house, making his statement lack depth and failing to support event reconstruction. Evan's claim of sleeping continuously for about 8 hours without noticing the garage opening raised questions about the accuracy of his statement, though it was not yet sufficient to constitute a direct contradiction. When the investigative team asked specifically about Evan's sleeping habits, he replied that he usually sleeps deeply, but provided no examples or corroborating evidence, creating a minor point of doubt but one without sufficient weight. During analysis, police noted that discrepancies in timing and lack of detailed description in Evan's statement could stem from limited memory of the night in question, but could also indicate intentional minimization of what he heard or knew. However, to determine whether this was a sign of concealment or merely a natural variation in testimony, the investigative force required corroborating physical data, which at that point was completely non-existent. There were no signs of intrusion in the house, no disturbed items, no unfamiliar footprints, and no physical evidence linking Evan to operating the vehicle or leaving the house during the early morning hours. Fingerprint analysis around the garage and entry doors produced no new patterns beyond those of household residents. This prevented police from arguing that Evan had a direct role in the events leading to the subject's disappearance. Additionally, Evan's financial records and personal schedule in the preceding days showed no signs related to conflict, financial pressure, or unusual behavior. Review of personal relationships also revealed no risk factors involving enmity or disputes. Although the vague details in the statement warranted higher-level monitoring of Evan, they did not meet the threshold to classify him as a suspect or to initiate a criminal investigation targeting him. Under 1984 investigative standards, concluding that a statement contained minor inconsistencies without accompanying physical evidence of criminal conduct could not be used to elevate the file to priority investigation status. Therefore, Evan was placed on the person of interest requiring monitoring list, meaning all statements, behaviors, and related data would be fully documented for comparison with new findings. But the investigative force lacked sufficient legal grounds to regard him as a suspect. Risk stratification in this phase placed Evan at a medium risk level, present at the scene, statement lacking clarity, but no specific indicators of criminal conduct. Other family members were excluded from consideration due to not being present at the house that night and having verifiable alibis. The conclusion of the family statement evaluation phase was that no data existed capable of redirecting the investigation inward to the family or expanding the file in a criminal direction. Lack of physical evidence, lack of direct witnesses, and the inherent vagueness of the statements could not serve as grounds to formulate a specific criminal hypothesis. This kept the case in open status without new directions, while reinforcing the reality that most data needed to explain events during the early morning hours had either not been discovered or had left no trace. After completing the evaluation of family member statements without obtaining new investigative signals, police entered the phase of handling false leads and nuisance reports, which increased as information about the disappearance spread in the community. The investigative team received and checked each report to avoid missing important data, though most were quickly determined to be unrelated. The first lead came from Memphis, where a resident reported seeing someone resembling the missing subject at a gas station on the Southern Highway. When the investigative team contacted the location and requested detailed description, the identification provided by the witness did not match in age, height, or build. Moreover, the reported time occurred after the established time of disappearance, completely ruling out the possibility that the person seen in Memphis was the actual subject. Nevertheless, verification still consumed time due to the absence of surveillance cameras for image comparison, forcing reliance entirely on witness memory, which is prone to error. Another report came from Kentucky, where local police recorded a vehicle with similar color and style to the subject's abandoned near a sparse forest area. The Nashville investigative team immediately coordinated to check the vehicle's VIN, and the results showed it did not match the missing subject's vehicle. However, because the vehicle was abandoned in a lightly damaged state, local forces initially suspected a connection to the disappearance, leading to a prolonged verification process requiring thorough checks of items left in the vehicle, marks on the body, and statements from the discoverer. Although ultimately determined to be a vehicle abandoned due to mechanical failure, handling the report forced the investigative team to temporarily allocate resources out of state, disrupting central analysis progress. Another lead involved a resident's claim of hearing a loud argument near the subject's residential area on the night of the event. When cross-referenced with a verified timeline, police found a significant discrepancy. The time stated by the witness did not align with any activity in the 10:30 p.m. to 4 a.m. window. Nearby residents also recorded no similar sounds, and there was no solid evidence that the noise actually originated from the subject's house area. Upon deeper interview, the witness admitted uncertainty about the date and time, as the information stemmed from vague memory and was likely influenced by hearing news about the disappearance. This report was therefore classified as having no usable value. Numerous other reports noted similar colored vehicles appearing in Tennessee, Georgia, and Alabama, but all were ruled out after VIN checks or owner verification. In most cases, reports submitted by civilians or other state police relied solely on vehicle color description, while model year and license plate did not match the missing subject vehicle. Since 1984 lacked real-time license plate lookup systems, police had to conduct manual checks by interagency communication lines, prolonging verification and increasing the risk of errors due to unsynchronized information. Some other reports involved sightings of individuals resembling the subject in stores along highways, but checks of payment receipts, shift logs, or staff interviews yielded no matching details for a verifiable itinerary. These errors clearly reflected the limitations of 1984-era investigations, when there were no image databases, no automated identification systems, and the entire verification process relied on subjective manual recording. After compiling all nuisance reports, the investigative team analyzed their impact on case progress. Because each lead had to be processed according to standard procedure, the investigative force had resources dispersed, particularly field personnel and interagency coordination teams. Some verifications required on-site travel or information collection from multiple agencies, extending processing time without producing breakthrough findings. Additionally, reliance on verbal descriptions meant every report carried potential for misunderstanding, especially when informants were influenced by community concern, weak memory, or personal speculation. This increased error rates and forced police to carefully eliminate each lead to avoid missing genuine data. The overall impact of the false lead chain was a significant slowdown in investigative progress. Instead of focusing on technical analysis or targeted expanded searches, authorities had to divide personnel for report verification, depleting time and resources without yielding substantive results. Nuisance reports also created social pressure, forcing police to issue public responses to reassure the community while not helping narrow the case scope. By the end of this phase, the investigative team concluded that none of the peripheral report leads contributed to explaining the subject's disappearance. All were ruled out due to mismatched identification, non-matching VINs, timeline incompatibility, or lack of physical basis for validation. These factors kept the case lacking leads, while emphasizing that all community-sourced investigative directions produced no progress, forcing authorities to return focus to the previously established core variables. After nearly 2 years of continuous processing without obtaining any viable investigative leads, authorities were forced to summarize the entire scope of operations to reassess the actual level of progress in the missing person case. During the period 1984 to 1986, all investigative directions implemented yielded no results. No body or any indication that the subject had met with foul play was found within the search radius. The vehicle was not recovered despite exhaustive checks of major routes, accident reports, parking lots, storage facilities, and peripheral areas. No physical evidence was obtained that could identify its origin or direct connection to the disappearance, and there were no direct witnesses who saw the subject leave the house or interact with anyone after the lights went out the previous evening. These deficiencies left the case file without any physical anchor to continue building hypotheses or expanding the investigation. During the re-review of internal evidence, the investigative team discovered that some initial samples collected inside the house were unusable due to classification and preservation errors. Several small trace samples, such as stains on door handles, fabric fibers near walkways, and unusual dust in the garage, were not separated and labeled according to standards, making it impossible to determine their origin later. This was particularly serious in the context of 1984, when DNA analysis or advanced trace processing technology did not yet exist. Any improperly labeled samples were essentially rendered meaningless. The investigative team documented these errors in the summary report, but they were insufficient to open a new investigative direction or produce valuable evidence, Additionally, the timelines related to the garage door sound, family member statements, and peripheral witnesses provided no definitive data. The timeline was narrowed but offered no explanation for what happened to the subject during the 3055-4005 a.m. window. As a result, police could not reclassify the case from routine missing person to suspected criminal act because no elements met the criteria for opening a criminal investigation. When assessing risk based on the standards of the era, the event was categorized as low risk due to the absence of evidence of assault, no signs of property coercion, no history of conflict involving the subject, and no witness reports of threatening behavior in the proximate time frame. These factors made it impossible for authorities to justify continued large-scale personnel allocation when the prolonged period produced no progress. Furthermore, Nashville Police Department management began viewing the case as a potential voluntary disappearance, possibly tied to personal factors that left no trace. Although there was no confirming evidence, the complete lack of data across all aspects made this hypothesis the least resource-intensive option under administrative procedures of the time. By the end of 1985, the file was re-evaluated once more and concluded that no additional new information could be gathered under the existing technical conditions and investigative scope. Large-scale searches had concluded, peripheral tip lists had been fully screened, and all investigative directions had been exhausted to the maximum extent possible given the capabilities of the era. No new variables existed to maintain active investigation status. In early 1986, Nashville Police Department Command issued an administrative decision to close the case proactively. The matter was officially placed in archived status with the classification missing person unresolved, meaning authorities could only reopen it upon the emergence of new physical evidence, a direct witness, or recovery of the vehicle 3 elements that were entirely absent at the time. In April 1986, all related documents were transferred to the Davidson County Cold Case Storage Facility. The file was sealed in the archive area designated for cases deemed unsolvable based on existing evidence. This decision marked the official entry of the disappearance into a state of complete impasse. No investigative direction, no technical support foundation, no basis for continued action, and no personnel assigned for active follow-up. From this point forward, the case existed only as a dormant file, entirely dependent on the future emergence of a new piece of data. After the file was transferred to the Davidson County Cold Case Storage in 1986, the disappearance gradually became one of the cases showing no signs of progress for many years. However, under periodic review cycles, authorities conducted 3 file re-examinations between 1990 and 2010 to evaluate the potential for reopening based on minor changes in procedure or technology. The first review occurred in 1992, when the Cold Case Command initiated a re-evaluation of long-term missing persons cases with the goal of identifying those that could benefit from improved timeline reconstruction methods. The Michael Radcliffe disappearance file was included in the review group due to its relatively clear timeline within the 12 hours before and after the event. However, when the 1992 task force reanalyzed the entire timeline, they found no new inputs. The established points 8:18 p.m., leaving work, 8:10 p.m. returning to the residential area, 10:30 p.m. lights out, and 3:45-45 a.m. garage opening retained their accuracy, but added no explanatory direction. With no new witnesses or evidence altering value, the timeline reconstruction merely confirmed that the time gap remained completely unexplainable with existing data. No 1992 analytical technique expanded the interpretive framework. So the first review concluded without reopening the file. The second review took place in 1998, when the National DMV Vehicle Storage and Query System was federally upgraded, allowing nationwide VIN lookups instead of state-limited searches. This was seen as a plausible opportunity to trace the subject's vehicle. As in most unexplained disappearances, the vehicle serves as the primary lead. The cold case review team used the VIN stored in the 1984 file and conducted a full federal search, including states bordering Tennessee and areas with higher rates of invalid title transfers. However, the DMV system at that time only held records from the mid-1980s onward, and many states were still transitioning from paper to digital files, resulting in inconsistencies and data loss. Upon completion of the query, no records matched the subject's vehicle. Near matches had clear registration histories and no plausible connection. This expanded search produced no indication that the vehicle remained in the legitimate registration system or had entered the disposal process. Thus, the 1998 review also concluded with no new data. The third effort occurred in 2004, when DNA testing technology began to be more widely applied to archived cases. The Cold Case Task Force selected the Radcliffe file because the original file noted several items collected at the house, such as fabric fibers, small stains on door handles, and dust samples gathered in the garage. DNA testing was viewed as an option to determine whether an unknown person was present at the time of the disappearance. However, upon reopening the evidence box, the analysis team discovered that many items had been misclassified or preserved below standard due to 1984 collection procedures not meeting biological preservation requirements. Some samples were stored together in the same sealed bag instead of being separated, causing DNA degradation or cross-contamination. Others lost labels indicating collection location, rendering them legally valueless even if analyzable. Among the few samples with identifiable locations, the DNA quantity was insufficient for accurate results under 2004 standards. Moreover, since no evidence indicated a struggle or violent contact, pursuing traces of an unknown person's DNA was already unlikely to yield results. Additionally, during the review of accompanying paper documentation, the analysis team discovered an old note with the name Holt inserted into an unrelated document page. Because the note lacked a date, context, and any supporting documents explaining it, the review team could not verify its accuracy or origin. Investigators considered it might be the name of a witness mentioned in a 1984 call that was never fully followed up, or simply a misfiled internal note. Lacking verification data, the name Holt was not deemed sufficient grounds to expand the file in 2004. After evaluating the results of all three reviews, the cold case unit concluded that no progress had been made due to two core reasons: technical limitations of each era that prevented samples from being analyzed to new standards, and the continued failure to locate the vehicle, the single most critical element for determining travel direction or the subject's final location. Without the car, without a body, with most evidence unusable, an unchanged timeline, and no new witnesses, the disappearance remained in inactive file status. The final review of the 1990-2010 period closed with the same conclusion as in 1986. The case had no prospect of advancement under current conditions and continued to be preserved in cold case storage, awaiting the emergence of a new factor that, at that time, remained entirely unidentified. By 2013, when the Davidson County Cold Case Unit underwent restructuring and began applying new analytical technologies to long-standing cold cases, the Radcliffe disappearance file was added to the reevaluation list due to its many variables that had not been fully exploited with modern technology. The new investigative team began by inventorying and reanalyzing the entire original evidence list using next-generation optical and biological equipment, capable of detecting traces that 1980s methods could not identify. During the review, they noted that one piece of evidence previously considered no value, the garage key, remained in storage in a condition suitable for analysis. When the key was scanned with surface analysis equipment, the technical team detected a very small stain adhering to the key body, a trace that had never been processed in prior reviews because the technology of those times lacked sufficient sensitivity. After collection and separation, the stain showed potential to contain organic or mineral components, opening the possibility of origin analysis that contradicted the initial assessment that the key held no investigative value. At the same time, the data analysis team reconstructed the timeline using motion simulation software, compiling all time points from 8 p.m. to 6:45 a.m. based on statements, lighting conditions, residential area characteristics, and the subject's habitual behavior. Although the overall timeline remained unchanged from what was obtained in 1984, the simulation software allowed reevaluation of movement scenarios and determined that the garage opening event in the 35:45 a.m. window was the sole anomaly capable of leading to a change in the vehicle's physical status. This was considered a key factor because if the garage operated at that time, it meant the vehicle left the house during the night, and its subsequent route should have left some level of trace. With advanced data analysis capabilities, the specialized team assessed that the investigative direction needed to focus entirely on locating the missing vehicle, as it was the only hard evidence capable of surviving in the external environment for many years, while retaining direct traces related to the disappearance event. They decided to reopen the nationwide VIN database, this time using modern recognition algorithms capable of checking incomplete records, identifying faded VINs, and cross-referencing cases with minor character variations due to input errors or damaged old documents. This software also enabled tracing vehicles that had entered salvage, auction, or seizure systems, something the 1998 database could not do, although no immediate results emerged. Reopening the VIN system with new technology created broader search potential and the possibility of detecting the vehicle still existing in environments outside official registration systems. Beyond the vehicle, the investigative team adopted a new principle, focusing on hard evidence, meaning objects capable of enduring over time, such as metal, hard plastic, or items with durable traces. Soft evidence, such as fabric, dust, or organic material that had already degraded or become contaminated, was considered less valuable in the new context. Shifting focus to hard evidence helped narrow the investigative scope and avoid repeating the failures of previous reviews. The technical team also used fluorescent scanning technology to re-examine certain items in the file, but the garage key remained the only evidence showing signs of insufficient prior analysis. When synthesizing all findings, the investigative group concluded that new technology could not clarify old degraded samples, but could extract value from durable evidence, such as the key, and especially the missing vehicle. Therefore, they viewed the pursuit of the car as the most important investigative direction because if found, it could contain DNA, environmental traces, fingerprints, fabric fibers, or mechanical indications of who drove it during the time of the disappearance. The full file re-evaluation phase concluded with the determination that although most original data no longer held direct value, new technology and the expanded nationwide search scope created an opportunity to access information that had previously been unexploitable. As a result, the Radcliffe file was, for the first time in many decades, placed in the category of cold cases with potential for reactivation if new data emerged from the vehicle search process. The element identified as the center and the only remaining key to the disappearance. During the cold case unit's continued expansion of the vehicle search using the nationwide VIN algorithm, a breakthrough occurred when a private storage warehouse owner in the Antioch area contacted police to report that a vehicle had been abandoned in an old storage unit since the early 1990s, recently vacated. The warehouse owner stated that the vehicle had been brought in by a previous tenant without valid paperwork and had remained unclaimed for decades. When authorities arrived to inspect, the vehicle's external characteristics, including paint color, body style, and overall condition, matched the description of Michael Radcliffe's vehicle in the 1984 file. The investigative team compared the VIN stamped on the vehicle frame with the VIN in the archived file, and the result confirmed a complete match, marking the first time in nearly 3 decades that the most critical piece of evidence in a disappearance had been located. The vehicle's current condition showed thick dust accumulation and minor damage to the rear, but no major impact suggesting a serious collision. Inside the vehicle, no registration papers or personal documents remained, indicating the vehicle may have been deliberately stripped of identifying traces upon arrival at the warehouse. Nevertheless, many details remained intact and undisturbed, providing favorable conditions for evidence collection. The technical team began interior examination and quickly identified several traces of investigative value. Near the dashboard and front seats, there was a patch of dried dark brown fluid adhering to the carpet, identified as an organic substance suspected to be long coagulated blood. Because modern DNA analysis technology can process partially degraded dry samples, the investigative team collected this sample according to standard protocol for laboratory submission. Additionally, in the rear seat gap, a small piece of torn fabric was found that did not match the vehicle's interior material, suggesting it could be a remnant left during movement or a struggle before the vehicle was abandoned. An old paper map was discovered under the passenger side floor, torn in several places but still identifiable in geographic areas, indicating it may originally have been used for route navigation. This map became significant evidence because it could point to locations the vehicle had been taken to after leaving the residential area where the disappearance occurred. Furthermore, the investigative team collected a substantial amount of soil caked under the vehicle's undercarriage. Since soil composition is characteristic of specific geographic areas based on mineral content, soil analysis could help trace the vehicle's travel route or locations where it stopped before being left in storage. Soil samples were collected by layer of adhesion to distinguish accumulation periods, supporting future geological tracing. The discovery of multiple durable traces inside the vehicle led the investigative team to open a separate analysis branch focused entirely on the vehicle. This decision was based on the assessment that, in the context of a decades-old cold case, the car was the only remaining evidence capable of retaining direct traces from the time of the disappearance. It had the potential to contain information about who drove it after leaving the garage, locations the vehicle had passed through, environmental traces accumulated along the journey, and even biological evidence indicating the presence of another person in the vehicle during the relevant time frame. The torn map, fabric fragments, suspected dried blood sample, and undercarriage soil became the four primary evidence groups prioritized for submission through the new procedural chain, opening access to data that had never existed in the file for nearly 30 years prior. The investigative team transported the vehicle to a secure facility for detailed analysis, marking a major turning point and the beginning of a series of new discoveries with the potential to fundamentally alter the approach to the Radcliffe disappearance case after decades of impasse. The Cold Case Unit's laboratory began analyzing all evidence recovered from the vehicle in the Antioch storage unit, viewing this as the first opportunity in 3 decades to potentially establish a direct link between the vehicle and a specific individual. The dark brown dried substance sample collected from the vehicle carpet was prioritized for initial processing due to its potential to be human blood. Although the sample had degraded over time, 2013 DNA extraction technology allowed partial recovery of genetic material sufficient for comparison against the CODIS system. The analysis results showed that the DNA profile did not match the missing person, but matched the record of an individual arrested in the late 1980s, Raymond Holt, a man with a prior record for petty theft and false reporting, but no history of violence. This was the first time the Radcliffe disappearance case had a DNA link to an individual outside the family circle, marking evidence capable of indicating the presence of another person in the vehicle after the time of the disappearance. This immediately elevated the vehicle's significance in the cold case file and turned Raymond Holt into a subject requiring detailed verification. In addition to the DNA sample, the investigative team continued analyzing the fabric fragment found in the rear seat gap. The fragment consisted of a distinctive synthetic material commonly used in 1980s workwear, particularly mechanic jackets or protective coveralls used in auto repair garages. To determine compatibility, the analysis team compared the material to samples from popular clothing catalogs of the period and equipment supply reports from local companies during the time Holt worked at a small garage near Dickerson Pike. The results showed a high degree of match with the type of uniform used by that garage in 1984, where Raymond Holt had been listed as a part-time employee according to employment records. This was the second link between Holt and the vehicle, reinforcing the hypothesis that Holt was present in the vehicle during the period relevant to the disappearance, or participated in moving the vehicle after it left the garage. Next, the environmental analysis team processed the soil samples caked under the vehicle's undercarriage. Using modern spectrometry technology, they were able to identify characteristic mineral compositions specific to different geographic areas within Davidson County. Cross-referencing the results with geological mineral maps showed that the soil adhering to the vehicle originated from an area with high clay and manganese content, primarily distributed in the Old Hickory region, a semi-rural area, with many vacant lots, forest trails, and unpaved secondary roads in the 1980s. This indicated a high likelihood that the vehicle had been taken to or stopped in the Old Hickory outskirts before being moved to the Antioch storage unit, as the soil composition did not match the residential area where Radcliffe lived or the major Nashville roadways. This was a directional finding that helped narrow the geographic scope for subsequent investigative steps. The mechanical inspection team continued examining the accelerator and brake pedals to assess driver characteristics. Wear patterns on the rubber reflected pedal pressure, foot angle, and stride width. When compared to anthropometric records of Radcliffe family members, none matched. The foot width, pedal pressure intensity, and wear position toward the outer edge of the pedals indicated that the driver had a heavy gait, strong leg force, and significantly larger shoe size than anyone in the family. When cross-referenced with Raymond Holt's physical profile from his 1987 arrest record, Holt's height and weight aligned with the pattern capable of producing such pedal wear. While not absolute confirmation, when combined with the DNA and fabric evidence, this became the fourth piece linking Holt to the vehicle, further supporting the hypothesis that he had driven the vehicle at least once in close proximity to the disappearance. Additionally, mechanical inspection data revealed the vehicle's operating style based on uneven wear patterns, deep accelerator habits, and steering angle, not matching descriptions of the missing person's driving habits, who was described as careful and rarely operating the vehicle aggressively. This indicated that the driver in the later period was not Radcliffe, indirectly reinforcing that the vehicle was controlled by a third party. Combining all data from DNA, fabric, soil, and mechanical characteristics, the investigative team concluded that Raymond Holt represented the first breakthrough in nearly 3 decades. Holt was the only individual appearing in hard evidence with a high degree of match across 4 independent analysis groups, indicating the likelihood that he was present in the vehicle or involved in moving it after the subject's disappearance. The investigative focus therefore shifted from tracing the vehicle to backtracking Holt's activities around 1984 and determining any connection, if one existed, with Michael Radcliffe's disappearance. The cold case unit's operational conclusion identified Holt as an individual requiring comprehensive vetting, marking the first step in linking the disappearance to a suspect grounded in physical evidence, ending the era of speculation-based case status and opening a new approach based on concrete data. After identifying Raymond Holt as the first breakthrough through the chain of evidence recovered from the vehicle, the investigative team expanded the analysis to encompass Holt's entire record from the 1980s in order to establish relational context, income sources, workplaces, and potential connections to other individuals. The employment record review showed that Holt had worked part-time at a small garage on Dickerson Pike in 1984, precisely during the period when the disappearance occurred. The garage maintained a simple transaction and debt ledger recording individuals who owed money for repairs or parts purchases not yet paid. When the investigative team retrieved the archived debt ledger, they discovered an entry marked ER appearing 3 times between February and March 1984, corresponding to the time frame immediately before and after the Radcliffe disappearance. No one on the garage's customer list had the initials ER, making this entry a rare anomaly in the records. From this point, the investigative team began considering the possibility that ER was the abbreviation of an individual directly connected to Radcliffe, and the only name fitting both the initials and circumstances was Evan Radcliffe, the missing person's son. The review of Evan's financial records from 1983-1985 revealed several unexplained cash withdrawals, particularly one of moderate value at the end of February 1984, closely coinciding with the garage's recording of the ER transaction. While not sufficient for charges, this created reasonable suspicion that Evan had engaged in cash transactions outside normal family spending, especially since at that time Evan lacked stable employment and had no clear financial reason for withdrawing such an amount. To assess whether Holt moved the vehicle alone or as part of a group, the investigative team reviewed criminal records of individuals previously associated with Holt. In that list, they identified Charles Washington, who had been arrested alongside Holt in a minor theft case in 1983. The criminal record clearly noted that Washington and Holt had a close relationship, frequently appearing together at the garage, and both had worked casual jobs for various vehicle owners in the East Nashville area. This relationship provided grounds to consider the hypothesis that more than one person was involved in handling the vehicle or assisting Holt in moving it to locations outside surveillance coverage. The investigative team continued expanding financial network analysis, this time focusing on Brianna Ellis, Evan's girlfriend in 1984, whose name appeared sporadically in documents related to non-family transactions. Cross-referencing Ellis's banking history, the team discovered a small but unusual cash withdrawal in the exact week of the Radcliffe disappearance. The amount was not large, but its timing aligned with Evan's withdrawal and the ER entries in the garage debt ledger, creating a noteworthy coincidence. Additionally, some old statements had recorded Ellis visiting that garage several times in 1984 to pick up Holt or Washington according to employee accounts, though no official documentation existed. The scattered data chain, ER, transactions, Evan's cash withdrawal, the Holt-Washington relationship, and Ellis's unusual financial activity, when analyzed through a network diagram, show that the 4 individuals potentially had indirect or direct connections to one another in the period surrounding the disappearance. The behavioral analysis team reconstructed the relationship diagram, placing Raymond Holt at the center in the role of driver or vehicle mover. Charles Washington, as Holt's familiar associate, possibly providing technical or transport support. Evan Radcliffe, in a financial role appearing in the debt ledger under the corresponding initials, and Brianna Ellis, with cash transactions coinciding in timing. Although no evidence yet confirmed coordination among them, the alignment of the data chain caused the 4 subjects to be linked for the first time within a single relational structure, entirely different from the hypotheses maintained for many decades prior. This relationship diagram became a critical operational tool to guide the next investigative steps, as it provided a logical foundation for the possibility that the disappearance was not a spontaneous act, but the result of a coordinated sequence of activities, with Holt as the central figure, Washington as a technical or transport associate, and Evan and Ellis appearing in the financial chain. Completing the relationship diagram among the four individuals enabled the cold case unit, for the first time, to shift from evidence analysis to evaluating the organizational structure of the behavior, standardizing the data into a clear network of connections, and laying the groundwork for examining motive, roles, and actions of each individual in the next phase of the investigation. With the relationship diagram established based on evidence and financial data, the cold case unit entered the phase of interviewing key subjects to test the degree of involvement, seek inconsistencies in statements, and identify potential motives. The interview strategy began by isolating Brianna Ellis from the other three subjects, as she held a peripheral financial role and was assessed as more likely to disclose under pressure compared to Holt and Washington, who had criminal histories and greater experience resisting interrogation. When interviewed under controlled conditions, Brianna initially denied any involvement in the 1984 events, but when investigators presented data on the timed cash withdrawal and her appearances at the garage where Holt worked, the tone of her statement shifted. From complete denial, Brianna moved to admitting that Evan had discussed with her a serious family matter in the period immediately before the disappearance, in which Evan sought cash to handle a private issue. Although Brianna did not specify the nature of the plan, this indirect statement indicated that Evan had engaged in unusual financial preparation before Radcliffe's disappearance. The interview team recorded the statement as non-incriminating information, but sufficient to create a basis for cross-referencing with other data. When cross-referencing Brianna's statement with newly obtained facts, the investigative team decided to recall Evan Radcliffe for re-interview after nearly 3 decades since the case occurred. Evan was asked to explain the 1984 cash transactions, the ER notation in the garage debt ledger, and why he had not disclosed knowing Holt or having met Washington, when new evidence showed both were connected to the missing person's vehicle. Evan maintained that he did not know Holt or Washington, denied any transactions at the garage, and claimed the cash withdrawals at the time were solely for personal expenses. However, when investigators presented the ER description appearing in the garage ledger at the exact time of the withdrawal, Evan could provide no specific explanation, causing clear inconsistencies to emerge in his statement. Additionally, Evan described 1984 as a normal period with no financial stress, while archived financial data showed multiple expenditures exceeding his income and several cash transactions lacking explanation. This created a contradiction between his statement and objective data. The behavioral analysis specialist began evaluating Evan's responses during the interview process. Evan repeatedly used vague descriptions and evasive answers when questioned about time points related to Holt or the garage, in contrast to his ability to recall detailed unrelated events from the same period. The avoidance of providing clear information, combined with the tendency to downplay familiarity with individuals now linked to the vehicle, significantly increased the likelihood that Evan was concealing behavior or important information. In subsequent interview sessions, the investigative team focused on assessing chronological logic by asking Evan to recount the sequence of events in February and March 1984. Evan stated he had no special activities during that period, but banking data showed numerous unexpected expenditures, and Brianna's statement confirmed Evan had unexplained private meetings. The mismatch between his statement and actual data further reinforced the possibility that Evan was concealing information related to preparation for a significant event and possibility consistent with the physical evidence suggesting third-party intervention. Meanwhile, the team also evaluated the reliability of Brianna's statement by cross-referencing it with objective data. The alignment of her cash withdrawal with Evan's withdrawal and the ER garage transactions made her statement consistent with Evan's financial context. At the same time, no detail in her statement was contradicted by objective data. This led to Brianna's statement being assessed as having medium to high reliability and directional investigative value. For Washington and Holt, the investigative team did not yet conduct direct interviews in this phase, as the logical file needed further completion before confronting subjects with criminal histories. However, by reconstructing the contact network and checking internal inconsistencies in Evan's statement, the specialized team concluded that Evan's level of involvement was significantly higher than the initial 1984 assessment. The contradictions between his new statement and his original 1984 statement removed Evan from the person of interest requiring monitoring category and moved him closer to a category potentially involving a financial or organizational role. The overall assessment of the interview phase determined that Brianna's statement opened a chain of data consistent with the evidence, while Evan's statement showed clear incompatibility with objective data and new findings from the vehicle. This substantially increased the probability that Evan had direct involvement in the events leading up to and following Radcliffe's disappearance, combining behavioral assessment, statement inconsistencies, and the fit of Brianna's statement with real data. The cold case unit determined that the interview of Evan had shifted from information verification to evaluating potential participation in the event, although clear incriminating elements were still lacking. As a result, the relational structure among the subjects began to take clearer shape, providing an operational foundation to expand interviews of the remaining individuals in the contact network. After completing the interviews with Brianna and Evan, the investigative team shifted to the two remaining key subjects in the relationship diagram, Raymond Holt and Charles Washington, with the goal of determining each person's actual role in the 1984 events. The focus of this phase was to use the DNA evidence obtained from the vehicle to apply direct pressure, as this was the first piece of evidence in 3 decades to link a specific individual to the missing person's vehicle. In the first interview session, Holt denied any involvement, claiming he had never come into contact with Radcliffe's vehicle and knew nothing about the disappearance. However, when investigators placed the DNA results on the table and confirmed that the sample from the vehicle matched Holt's biometric record, stored from the late 1980s, Holt's demeanor changed markedly. He became flustered, lost the ability to maintain his denial, and shifted to a passive defensive posture. Nevertheless, Holt still avoided direct disclosure and requested legal counsel. While processing that request, the investigative team moved on to interviewing Washington, who was considered more psychologically vulnerable due to lacking a strong history of resisting interrogation. When confronted with data showing Holt's traces in the vehicle, Washington initially tried to distance himself from any actions by blaming Holt, but inconsistencies in his statement quickly emerged, prompting the team to intensify the cross-referencing tactic. As investigators pressed repeatedly about timing, routes, and reasons for his documented appearances with Holt in later records, Washington lost control when faced with the possibility of being held accountable based on circumstantial evidence. Fearing that Holt might shift all blame onto him, Washington changed strategy and admitted that he had been present when the event occurred, though he still tried to minimize his involvement by describing himself as just along for the ride. This admission became a pivotal turning point, as for the first time since 1984, a direct witness confirmed being with Holt on the night Radcliffe disappeared. When questioned about time points related to the vehicle, Washington stated that Holt had driven the car away from the Radcliffe residence in the early morning hours and instructed him to follow along. This statement aligned with the timeline data regarding the garage door opening and matched the mechanical traces indicating the driver was not Radcliffe. Recognizing that Washington had shifted to partial cooperation, the interview team returned to Holt and continued applying pressure by informing him that Washington had admitted being at the scene. Faced with the risk of Washington being viewed as a proactively cooperating witness, Holt broke his silence and began providing fragmented information about the event. In his second statement, Holt admitted to playing the primary role in forcing Radcliffe to leave the house in the early morning, describing how he and Washington approached the garage while Radcliffe was asleep, using persuasion or threats to coerce Radcliffe into the vehicle. Although Holt still avoided detailing the exact method of coercion, this statement was sufficient to establish that Radcliffe did not leave the house voluntarily. When investigators asked him to describe the route after leaving the residential area, Holt stated that they drove to a sparse wooded area in Old Hickory, matching the soil analysis data from the undercarriage. There, according to Holt, Radcliffe was removed from the vehicle and restrained until he could no longer resist. Holt then described the process of digging a grave, asserting that Washington was present but did not directly participate in every action. Although Holt attempted to downplay Washington's role, his statement inadvertently confirmed coordination between the two throughout the entire movement sequence. When the interview team requested the specific location where the body was buried, Holt did not provide precise coordinates, but gave detailed descriptions of landmarks such as a red dirt turnoff, a large tree close to the trail, and the distance from the main road. Although relative, the investigative team noted that these features matched the geological data and soil structure analyzed from the vehicle, bolstering the statement's credibility. The final breakthrough in the interviews occurred when investigators cross-referenced Holt's statement with Washington's earlier statement from the same day. When questioned about discrepancies between the two accounts, Holt adjusted certain details and added that the burial site was several hundred meters from an open clearing, a description deemed sufficiently specific to launch a field search. with Washington's admission of being present at the event, and Holt's statement describing the full sequence of movement, coercion to leave the house, and burial. The cold case unit obtained the first direct information about the circumstances of the disappearance, along with a relative geographic location to determine where the body might be buried. This was the breakthrough that ended nearly 30 years of impasse and provided the operational basis to shift from file analysis to field search action to verify the statements with physical evidence. Based on Holt's statement regarding the burial area and the relative landmarks, the cold case unit deployed a field search team coordinated with forensic specialists and geotechnical experts to Old Hickory to carry out verification procedures. With the location described as sparse woods, red dirt road, and a large tree near a turnoff, the technical team used ground-penetrating radar to scan the surface for anomalies in subsurface structure. After multiple consecutive scans, an area showing signals consistent with an old burial pit within a 5-meter radius was marked, indicating that the soil layer at that position had previously been disturbed. Once the perimeter of the area to be excavated was established, the forensic team began removing thin layers of soil to avoid damaging evidence. At a depth of approximately 60 to 80 centimeters, the first fragments of human bone appeared, confirming that the area contained remains. To preserve structure, specialists used hand tools to carefully remove remaining soil layers and recover all bones in standard documented sequence. Gradually, they recovered most of the skeleton, along with a few remaining personal items such as a metal lock fragment, part of a keychain hook, and several heavily decomposed fabric pieces that still retained enough structure for preliminary identification. This was the first time in 30 years that authorities obtained direct physical evidence of Michael Radcliffe's condition after his disappearance. After fully recovering the remains, the forensic team transferred all samples to the laboratory for bone characteristic analysis, trauma detection, and DNA extraction from bone portions with sufficient mineral density. Due to time-induced DNA degradation, extraction required advanced molecular amplification techniques. After several days of processing, the DNA analysis results showed that the obtained genetic profile completely matched the reference DNA sample from the Radcliffe family still held in the file. Eliminating any doubt about identity, the remains discovered were those of Michael Radcliffe. This was a critical legal confirmation, reclassifying the case from missing person to confirmed homicide victim. Meanwhile, the forensic report on the skeleton revealed multiple abnormalities. Several ribs and arm bones showed cracks or fractures occurring before decomposition, consistent with trauma from strong external force. Additionally, the skull cavity exhibited traces consistent with external impact, indicating the victim was likely attacked prior to death. No signs of disease or self-inflicted injury were present on the skeleton. Based on the overall pattern of injuries, the medical examiner concluded that the cause of death was violent external force. Furthermore, the soil distribution structure around the burial area indicated the body was placed in the pit without any container or covering, suggesting hasty burial behavior without any measures to prolong decomposition or mask odor. The final forensic conclusion determined that the victim did not die from natural causes, accident, or self-harm, but from intentional third-party action. With DNA confirmation and cause of death analysis results, the case was legally reclassified as murder, first degree, and the file was officially reopened under first-degree murder, completely replacing the 1984 missing person file. Identifying the body, confirming identity, and determining cause of death provided the foundational evidence for the cold case unit to move into the phase of pursuing criminal accountability against the involved individuals. With the body exhumed, identity confirmed by DNA, in the forensic report establishing death by violent force, the cold case unit transferred the entire file to the Davidson County District Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution. Based on each individual's role established through statements, physical evidence, and digital timeline analysis, the prosecutor constructed a full set of charges. Evan Radcliffe, who appeared at the center of financial transactions, bore the ER notation in the garage debt ledger, and was reported by Brianna to have prepared the plan by providing cash to Holt, was charged with first-degree murder by procurement, meaning instigating or causing the killing. Holt, who had DNA in the vehicle, matching fabric from the 1984 garage uniform, admitted in his statement to forcing Radcliffe to leave the house and participating in the burial, was charged with felony murder based on causing death during the commission of a felony. Washington, who admitted being present at the scene and participating in moving the victim, despite attempting to minimize his role, was charged with second-degree murder for acting as an accomplice, who did not directly inflict the fatal act, but joined the sequence of actions leading to Radcliffe's death. Brianna Ellis, although not directly participating in the event, was charged with conspiracy due to her indirect statement confirming financial support and knowledge of Evans' plan during the preparation phase. At trial, the prosecution presented the evidence in a clear cause and effect structure. Holt's DNA in the vehicle, fabric fragment matching the uniform Holt used in 1984, undercarriage soil matching the Old Hickory geological layer where the body was found. Washington's statement confirming presence during the event. Holt's statement describing the full sequence of movement, coercion to leave the house, and burial. Brianna's statement clarifying Evans' financial role, along with a digital software-simulated timeline proving the garage opened at the time, consistent with both suspect statements. Financial records and behavioral analysis results from Evans' interviews were also entered, proving motive and pre-event preparation. The physical evidence and statements aligned at multiple key points, so the jury did not view the case as speculative, but as a logically connected chain of circumstances. After courtroom arguments, sentences were handed down based on each defendant's role. Evan received 35 years without parole, reflecting the severity of being the instigator. Holt received 30 years for his direct role as the perpetrator involved in causing death and concealing the body. Washington received a sentence in the 25 to 30-year range, depending on mitigating factors considered, but still within a strict framework due to participation in the sequence leading to death. Brianna received 10 years of probation due to cooperation with investigators and lack of direct involvement in the fatal act. The verdict closed more than 3 decades of a cold case while creating a significant impact on the Nashville community, which had lived for many years with the impasse of the Radcliffe disappearance. The revelation shocked the community because the person behind the entire event turned out to be the victim's own son, a discovery that shook long-held trust among many who knew the family. For the investigative field, the case became a representative case study in applying modern technology to cold case files, particularly in hard evidence analysis, degraded DNA, and timeline simulation. The Davidson County Cold Case Unit reported that the case-breaking turning point did not come from a new statement, but from recovering the vehicle, the core evidence lost for many years. The Radcliffe case thereafter stood as proof of the importance of long-term evidence preservation, cross-decade data connectivity, and the value of never abandoning an investigation even when the file appears hopelessly stalled. The Radcliffe case, spanning from 1984 until its resolution in 2013, reflects an important reality in contemporary American life. The combination of modern technology, legal transparency, and persistent investigation can restore justice even after decades of deadlock. The story shows how a seemingly unsolvable missing person case was ultimately cracked thanks to a single surviving piece of evidence: the car abandoned in the Antioch storage unit. The fact that this vehicle contained Raymond Holt's DNA, Old Hickory soil, garage uniform fabric fragments, and pedal wear patterns inconsistent with family members proved that truth can hide in seemingly minor evidence, and modern forensic science is now better equipped than ever to unlock it. The lesson for modern American society is that investing in investigative technology, DNA analysis, motion simulation, hard evidence identification brings not only immediate benefits but also long-term value to justice. At the same time, the story underscores ethical responsibility within families, as it was Evan, the son who became the mastermind. This reminds many Americans of the importance of mental health care, paying attention to behavioral changes within the family, and seeking early support when abnormalities appear. From a community perspective, the Radcliffe case reminds us that silence, lack of connection, and social isolation can create conditions for tragedy to unfold unnoticed. Therefore, building cohesive communities and paying greater attention to one another, from neighbors and co-workers to loved ones, can help prevent similar tragedies. Finally, this story highlights a familiar yet profound lesson. Justice may arrive late, but it is never hopeless as long as we continue to preserve truth, carefully store evidence, and keep searching for answers to what remains untold. If you want to continue following cases that seemed lost to time but were solved through justice and technology, like the Radcliffe story, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next episodes. Thank you for joining us, and see you in the next journey exploring unsolved mysteries in the upcoming video.